Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the new album from Bastille, Give Me the Future. I'm not going to lie, I'm just going to tell you where I'm coming from. I'm not the biggest Bastille fan, I'm not the biggest fan of this type of sound in general. But it looked like, just from the album art alone and from what people are saying, they were going in a more kind of synth-pop direction, more of like an 80s nostalgia throwbacky type direction, which is, a sound that I've got like an amount of love for. I really enjoyed the last Dua Lipa record, for example, and there's, a couple others that I enjoyed in this realm. So I figured, why not give it a shot? Also, I'm from London, so we sort of did Bastille to the world. I apologise to everyone, and I feel like I need to, come out as a stand against them, considering I'm from the same place as them, I guess. But that's about all I have to say. So, Bastille are a kind of like electropop, electropop and synth-pop kind of band that come from more of an indie rock perspective, and from an orchestration and compositional perspective, that's kind of what they're doing for the most part. I haven't actually listened to any of the records before. They're one of those bands where, I know I've heard a bunch of their songs. I might even have listened to a record in the past, but they're very nondescript. They kind of fall into, just a very average territory, so I couldn't really point to any traits that are, uniquely them or anything like that. You could almost replace, a lot of what they do with, any number of bands, and I wouldn't know the difference, really. But either way, we are on Give Me the Future, and like I said, this is a bit more of, I think, a colourful record for the band. It's a bit more focused on the synth, the kind of 80s nostalgia stuff. And right off the bat, I'll just get it out of the way and say that this record wasn't terrible by any stretch. It's not good either, exactly. I think overall my biggest issues with it are that I just find this approach to this style too overproduced and fake sounding. And it's, like I said, you get lots of bright synths backed by kind of, electronic drums, and the vocals are kind of one of the big issues I have with it as well. I find that this vocalist is very middling. He doesn't have a ton of personality to him. None of the vocal melodies are particularly memorable or anything like that. So on the parts of this record where it relies on vocals, and there are a decent number of them, he doesn't stand out to me as such. He's not like a terrible singer or anything, I don't think. I don't know a ton about singing, to be honest, but he just doesn't stand out to me as anything special. But the biggest area, in my opinion, where this album drops the ball is that basically every song has a very similar and very basic structure and doesn't really go anywhere particularly interesting. They'll kind of introduce an instrumental that's built up over maybe the first 30 seconds to 40 seconds. Then the whole band comes in for a chorus, and then they repeat a verse and a chorus. And then on the end, there might be a little bit of a synth solo. It might be a bit more kind of explosive, but nothing crazy by any stretch. And I think that's really the core takeaway for me. Nothing on this record was memorable, in stark contrast to something like the new Black Country New Road record, where even after a first listen I was like, so much of this is just popping out in my memory. I can vividly remember certain tracks after just one listen because of how unique certain ideas hit me and things like that. This has absolutely nothing like that on it. However, I've just spent a bit too long at the start of the podcast bashing them, so I will say that at the very least, there's moments where this record is actually quite fun. I think, for example, the first track is a good example of this. It's not a bad start to the record. It's called Distorted Light Beam. It's pretty much an inoffensive synth-wave and synth-pop song. Nothing especially stands out about it. The hook's pretty generic. It has one of the stronger 80s nostalgia feels of any of the tracks on the record. And all of the issues I've already mentioned kind of show up in this track, but it's not a bad track. It's a decently fun, catchy opening cut that I didn't hate, and there's a couple other songs on the record that are like that. For example, Give Me the Future I thought was okay. It's a slower, slightly more stripped back song, but it has a lot of deep buzzing kind of sounds that I kind of enjoyed. It has a bit of a cool vibe as well. The whole track just feels a bit more low-key, and I think that suits the vocal performance as well, which helps it to some extent. The big issue I have on this record, though, is and it shows up here and on a lot of songs, is on the final rendition of the chorus, or the final leg of the track, you get the impression that Bastille feel like they need to add something to give a little variety to the track, which isn't amiss sometimes, but when it's strings, which they do a fair bit on this record, it always sounds really tacky and fake to me because I don't know if they are artificial strings, but they really do sound it. They don't sound like they incorporate it into the song in a particularly interesting way either. It's more or less just like, we need something new here, so let's chuck this in. But overall, Give Me the Future, I didn't mind. Probably the best song though is Back to the Future. I would say that this basically reminded me a little bit of the last Dua Lipa record. It's not as good as anything off that, I don't think, but it's a fun little poppy track that reminded me of that. There's a couple interesting horn embellishments too, and the whole thing's held together with a really bright, kind of upbeat, peppy guitar riff that just, yeah, holds the song together. It's a decent, like, foundation for it, and the song has a more interesting progression than a lot of the other stuff on here, so that's another highlight in the track listing for sure. But for every single one of those, there's a decent amount of kind of just okay stuff I don't even know why it's really here. Like, the two interludes really didn't add a whole heck of a lot for me. Total Dissociation is the worst offender for sure. It's a short synthy interlude, and it kind of, I guess it's an idea that lasts for about 40 seconds. I don't know why it's there. It doesn't intro the next track particularly well either. At least with Brave New World, it's a string piece that serves as an intro to the next track, which is one of the ones I didn't mind, Back to the Future, but I still don't really know what it's doing here, honestly. So yeah, there's a decent number of cuts that are just sort of fine. Some stuff I don't know why it's doing here, but there are definitely a couple tracks I found borderline offensive to the senses. No Bad Days is one of them, which happens fairly early on the... Oh, sorry, not No Bad Days. Thelma and Louise is one of them. The track is kind of like a bit more sparse instrumentally, a little more skeletal instrumentally than some of the other tracks on here. And one of the major features is the bass. They kind of go for that whole like really groovy kind of like almost Daft Punk-esque bass, but the bass tone is just horrible. It sounds really fake, and other than that, it's just a painfully generic pop song. It's only 2 minutes long, and it manages to test my patience with its lack of ideas, and yeah, it just doesn't really go anywhere, so not really a fan. The other area in which this band failed pretty hard for me are the more overly dramatic cuts, I guess, and you get this from a lot of those kind of like really mainstream, large, kind of like indie-fluenced pop rock bands, and the track Plug-in is like a key example of that. It has a really auto-tuned vocal intro that just sounds not good, to put it lightly, and the strings that come in to uplift the song after that initial bit just sound really cheesy and add to that, yeah, overly dramatic way, or overly dramatic kind of tone, I guess. Eventually you get like a droning bass that comes in with a low-key beat that sounds okay. One of the issues with this track as well is that as more and more instrumentals come in, it does end up clashing a little bit. The progression isn't terrible, so that's okay, but the thing that really, you know, nail in the coffin kind of like moment, the thing that really does it for me, the thing that really kills the song is the tacky lyrics about like dystopian futures, and there's loads of really surface level kind of like jabs at billionaires and, you know, robots and stuff like that, and sure, whatever, but it feels really tacky for sure. It's not for me, to say the least. But yeah, I think that's pretty much... I haven't gone over every song. I'm not going to go over every song because this record, I don't really remember enough of it to go over absolutely everything. I've written notes, and some of these notes I don't remember, I'm going to be honest, because the whole track sort of... Or sorry, the whole album, like I said, because of the way it's produced, the whole album just bleeds into each other in a pretty bad way. I will say, for the most part, like I said, though, this album isn't offensive or anything like that. You can have it on the background, and for the most part, it'll be pretty pleasant and like a decent listen. But yeah, it's not my style of music. And while I can tell that the band were having fun at some parts, and I feel like a lot of their audience will have fun at some parts when some of the synths are slightly more bright and all that kind of stuff, at the same time, it's just infused of way too much of what I expect from that kind of indie background type of pop rock. It's got way too much of that stuff to be interesting to me. It doesn't do anything to differentiate itself, really. So yeah, I can't say I'm super stoked with this record or anything. It's not terrible. It was like, I guess, fine while it was on for the most part. So if that sounds interesting to you, I guess give it a listen, but if not, maybe avoid this one. There's a lot of great stuff out this year. This has been the first like big blunder, I guess, that I've listened to. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say. Is not great. But hey, I hope you've enjoyed my kind of aimless rant on Bastille, I guess. And hopefully I'll see you all around in the future. Peace out, everybody. Cheers for listening.